We listen to Katarina Ristić. Katarina is a research associate at the Helmut Schmidt University in Hamburg. Katarina writes in different subfields of transitional justice, and I collect her papers. These are all very interesting research things. Her major research interest is at the intersection of war crimes trials and the politics and culture of memory. Namely, there is one question that you ask about criminal trials after mass atrocities, and the question is simple: can criminal justice go beyond the standard role and function of criminal justice in normal situations? Can criminal justice create memories? And can criminal justice promote reconciliation or whatever? And Katarina wrote a book, Imaginary Trials, published in 2014, which deals with these and related questions. And the subject of Katarina's talk today is war crime trials and nationalism in the Balkans. Katarina.
Thank you, Nenad. Thank you, everyone. It's a great privilege to be here. I won't actually present this topic of national identity and how war crime trials were translated into nationalist narratives, which I addressed in the book. But I will present my current research because it deals with TV. And I thought it would be interesting to see what is contribution of visuals and how different TV stations dealt with war crime trials. You heard how it was during 90s. Now we go fast forward into 2005, from 2005 to 2015, when everything was different, and unfortunately nothing was really different. Due to time limits, I will skip theoretical frame, methods, and sources. Would be happy to discuss that with you later. But I would like to say that there is this idea that war crime trials could intervene in this natural appropriation of the past because they point out to atrocities, to victims, because they might open the space for victims' memories, for new counter-narratives which would then contest what is national narrative about the past. I will just quote Winter, who said that if they are presented, how should we put it, appropriately, if they are honestly recalled in public, these trials can lead a path to reconciliation and even forgiveness. So this is the idea that war crime trials can acknowledge or enable acknowledgement of atrocities and open space for the other side and victims' memory. Our main question was how media ascribed responsibility to the accused and how it presented the victims, whether they managed to invoke empathy, and how visuals and images contribute to this creation of meaning. Using Lily Haluraki's model, which she developed in Distant Suffering in her book, and adopting it a little bit to transitional justice issues, we came up with this kind of typology. I don't know if you can really read it, but basically we have three types of news when they are presenting war crime trials. The first type I called indifference news, and that is actually adoption of Haluraki's adventure news. And the main moral mechanism is don't care for victims. This is the idea of the first type. The second type is called dealing with the past news, and those news should create some kind of empathy or pity with victims. Finally, the third type, ecstatic news, is where you have very strong identification with victims. So this is not dealing the past, this is usually perpetuation of nationalism. Just to have you an idea how we analyzed news, we were looking for these 6 different aspects. First, these are created from Van Dijk's and Van Leuven's ideas on, or categories on critical discourse analysis of the press. First, we were looking at global meaning, or as Van Loven calls it, recontextualization chain. And here we are looking how different topics are rearranged and whether there are substitutions, whether there are dilatations, rearrangements, additions, repetitions, and so on. Secondly, we looked at global structure, and that is what parts of the news are present, right? So whether there are all 5 types which Van Dijk's defined or not. Then, of course, actors, who speaks about what, why, what kind of arguments, evaluations there are. And then we looked at global and local meanings of visual. When I talk about global meaning, I'm referring to Monaco's distinction between paradigmatic and syntagmatic meanings. So what is shown as opposed to what could have been shown as intervention of someone who creates the program, or how those parts which are combined together, how they work together, and how one scene adds to what the next is bringing. So what is the relation between sequences of the video? Finally, when talking about a local visual meaning, I'm referring to Kress and Van Loven book, Reading Images, where they developed a rather long, and I won't go into detail, analysis of visuals as a grammar of visuals, as they call it. So, applying this methodology to some 187 news from 6 war crime trials, and these are Milutinovic, Perišić, Stanisic. You all know what I'm talking about, so I won't go into detail. Gotovina, Orić, and Haradinaj. We were following 3 events: indictment, first judgment, second judgment, taking 2 days. All media, RTS, B92, and Pink. So this is material. So first, let me say something about indifference news. These news come in 2 forms. One is suspended news, and these suspended are characterized by a drastic transformation of participants and actions. What we did, we compared what media presents with the summary from ICTY decision. So we didn't expect journalists to read the whole judgment or the whole indictment, because this is really impossible, but just a summary which was provided by ICTY, right? So comparing this ICTY decision with media reports, we come with this evaluation that in these news we have very often dilatations and substitutions and rearrangements which are conducted in such a manner to conceal both actions, so crimes, and responsibility of the accused. These news are full of vagueness, denial, mitigations, and they are used to provide another interpretation of the trial. I will just give you an example. In Perišić indictment, all 3 stations deleted the same parts. And I quote, charges, murder, inhuman acts, persecution. These are deleted. We had to wait for the acquittal judgment, which was second judgment, where these crimes would actually appear in media. Then individual victims, which are named in indictment, so you have the list, when they died, how old they were, what kind of accident was there, completely deleted. They don't appear at all. Then you have no relation between Perišić and crimes, which was established in the indictment, so you can read what kind of logistic relation there was, that he did promotion of those people, what kind of promotion, how many weapons were sent, and so on and so on. So all this worked so well to conceal really what the ICTY document was talking about. Another example is substitution of charges. So in the ICTY indictment, you can read that this murder, inhuman acts, and attacks on civilians resulted in, I quote, 5 killed civilians and 121 wounded during the attacks in Zagreb. This is just one incident out of many in the indictment. And the Serbian press says, and I quote, shelling of Zagreb. So that covers everything. And as you can see, this is actually making this detachment from whatever was happening. Secondly, superstructure of this news is also telling. Usually out of 5 elements, we have only 2. We have only summary and main event. That means that there is no contextualization, no historical background, no causes, no consequences, no evaluation, no expectations. No one is commenting on this, neither politicians, no NGOs, no one, publicly, of course. In the terms of actors, main intervention of the suspended news is a verbal annihilation of victims. So they might appear in the text only as numbers. So you might find that there is 7,000 people, Muslims killed in Srebrenica, that you can find. But visually you won't find anything, and you won't find individual victims at all. On the level of paradigmatic meaning, visual, these news are interesting for everything they are not showing. As you can see, they show what I called normalization of war or peacetime activities of Serbian army. They might be shaking hands, they might be on parade, they might be giving statements. Whatever they do is deleting the goal of their action, right? It is deleting any involvement of the army in the conflict. As I already said, victims are completely deleted, so you don't have them appearing once. What is also important, I think that we can establish here, is that these pictures work as a new signifier for Yugoslav People's Army. And this is interesting because this is a movement in constructing the meaning which you cannot find in presenting other forces, which I would come up later with. But these images work in invoking this idea of defensive army protecting the country rather than attacking. They are creating, as you see from the shots, those are middle shots, usually presenting very friendly, nice atmosphere, what kind of relation there is within army. Army is completely structured, it is following the orders, they are all shaved, there are no paramilitaries, they are very disciplined, so you can say that they are really kind of very beautifully portrayed peaceful army, which is not doing any harm and, God forbid, any kind of atrocities. There is a special addition to this type within this indifference news, and this is where you have complete perspective shift. So these news are not similar in the sense that they are suspended, so they are very long. You have comments, you have evaluation, you have consequences. For example, Milutinovic judgment, 1 of 2 are both this kind of news. But here you have completely clear perspective of the accused. So media is completely clearly standing behind the accused and defending the accused from the ICTY or whatever accusation coming from. And just to give you an example, there is one news on judgment on Perisic, where B92 journalist managed to present one acquittal, although he was convicted on another 13 accounts to 27 years of prison, to present the whole news through this one account, then to connect this acquittal account with there is no responsibility of Serbia, leaving completely out any kind of criminal responsibility of the accused, of course leading to the conclusion that ICTY is unfair and unjust, since it is accusing people for no reason, right? So that would be the first type. Another possibility is war as politics, where you have politicians' meetings. Again, no relation to crimes. Second type is dealing with the past news, and unfortunately here I really don't have dealing with the past news, but rather failed dealing with the past news, since we do have some criterions which would then make it possible to call these news dealing with the past, but then they fail in some other parts. For example, RTS has one excellent report completely following ICTY judgment in the Milutinovic case. This news is 5 minutes long, it covers everything, judgment is read, everything what was established in the decision is there, but then next 5 following news are all from this perspective of accused, defending accused. So when you look the whole thing, then you realize that they are not really dealing with the past, but that one news for itself, analyzed separately, so to say, could be this kind of dealing with the past. One that I find, and this is only one out of 187 news where we have victims appear, is this news on Pink, on Perisic first judgment when he was convicted, and this 5-second long scene where you can see victims on the screen. So this is the only exception out of 187 news. Let me go now to ecstatic news. They are, of course, interesting because of what they bring. And they bring army in action, they bring destruction, they bring victims. They bring everything what was missing in Indifference news. In the sense of text, they have a lot of additions and repetitions. When I say about additions, for example, Haradinaj, in reporting about Haradinaj, media didn't just follow ICTY indictment, but adding new sources from prosecution, from other cases, from other individuals talking about what happened with them, basically creating this idea that he was accused for many things that he was never accused of, right? Then even introducing a greater sense of injustice once the acquittal was there. So as you can see, Croatian army, and that is also for Bosniak and KLA, what they do, they are involved in destruction, they are killing people, they are celebrating, they are firing. You sometimes even have this audio moment where you can hear grenades and this strong, dramatic moment. Of course, these are iconic images, I would say, of these trials. And here, these are Operation Storm, Serbian victims. You have it in big numbers so that you have idea of how big the crime is, but in order to have empathy, you would always have individual shots, close shots, always children, women, rarely men, never army. Army was not withdrawing from Croatia. That is something that never happened. And importantly, victims are always presented as in their terrible, poor economic situation. So it is this stereotype of victims being women or children and very poor. This is how they ended up. Right? So let me conclude with saying that with this decision, to present all news on Serbian war crime trials within this adventure or indifference type, as I name it, Serbian media literally concealed responsibility for these crimes of accused, right? Deleting both visually and textually crimes and victims of those crimes. So not only that they portrayed trials as misfortune of accused, they also implied the injustice and unfairness of the court, which for no good reason prosecutes Serbs. Moreover, media succeed in detaching the audience from the responsibility for conflict and heinous crimes committed, supporting only national grievances over the injustice against Serbs. This injustice is not only implied, as in case of Serbs accused, but it is also actively perpetuated in the case of ICTY trials against others. Hence, I think we can point out to the special importance of visuals, since, as you could see, the text sometimes includes some kind of victims. Visuals, never, none. So one exception, but the rule, I think, is clear. So this visual representation seemed to prove that emotionally and in a sense of empathy, visuals are playing some important role. And I would just say that sometimes this kind of biased reporting is seen by the public, right? And you have this refusal of the audience to play with, as Novak showed in these images. They were rejected, but by many in the audience at that time as propaganda. Quite contrary, I think, and some of our discussion groups confirm, that these reporting, even in such biased form, is not conceived or concerned or perceived as propaganda. They are perceived as rather neutral, objective presentation of ICTY trials. So as Farklow shows, it is the utmost achievement of the ideology to be perceived as neutral, common sense worldview, and nationalism in Serbia, even when subjecting its topics to such ideological manipulations as presented in this paper, still manages to operate as natural state of affairs, further confirming its rootedness and normalization in general public. Thank you.